How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, December 27th, 2021. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on Nick Chubb. The elite starting running back for the Cleveland Browns turns 26 today, and my intention with this episode is, of course, to focus in on the numbers and the statistics in the micro, which help prove the case of why he is one of the best running back out of the hundreds of thousands of people that are running backs competing for a job in the NFL. Even the people that are in the NFL themselves, he set themselves apart from them. And I'm also going to go over the accolades that he was able to earn in the macro over the long run, over just the course of his career, because Nick Chubb is quite a dynamic talent, and that's probably the best way to describe him. He stands at about 5'11". He stands at about 227 pounds, so he is pretty bowling ball size. So he's very strong. He has a lot of force, a lot of inertia with him when he runs. But of course, he's incredibly poised. He's very controlled when he runs, and of course he definitely helps out that Cleveland Browns offense, even though their team seems to be not moving as well as they feel like they should. The problem is most definitely not Nick Chubb. So, giving you a little bit of background, he's originally from Georgia. He went to high school in Cedartown, which isn't that far from the university. The university would go, Nick Chubb would end up going to commit to playing college football at the University of Georgia. His freshman year would be in the 2014 season, in Mark Richt's second to last season there. In Nick Chubb's freshman season in 2014, he would go on to play 13 games as he had to take over when Todd Gurley got hurt. But in his season where he had to take over, this was the season where Georgia would finish with a 10-3 record. They did finish as a top 10 team. They went all the way to the Belk Bowl, and they beat the Louisville Cardinals in that matchup. That was their last game that year. In the 13 games he played, he would finish with 219 carries for 1,547 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns. His freshman rushing yards were the most rushing yards that he actually had at Georgia. He also had 2 yards through the air. He had 1,760 total yards from scrimmage and 16 touchdowns. His yards from scrimmage and touchdowns were at a career high his freshman year, and this was a year in which not that many people were expecting him to really blow up like this. In his freshman year, he was named the SEC Freshman of the Year. He was also named to the first team All-SEC that year. And in the Belk Bowl itself, he would go down as the MVP in that game, of course, thanks to his incredible performance. And, of course, he went on to finish with 266 rushing yards, which actually broke the bowl game record. However, in his second season with the Georgia Bulldogs, which of course would be his sophomore season, in 2015, which would be Mark Richt's final season, he would go on to play 6 games in a season where Georgia finished with a 10-3 record as the 24th ranked team, with a win in the Tax Slayer Bowl versus Penn State. He would go on to have a grotesque knee injury as described by Wikipedia. It would prevent him from beating the record where he tied Herschel Walker with the most consecutive 100-yard games in Georgia history with 13. But in that season, in the 6 games he played, he had 747 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground. He had 4 receptions for 32 yards and a receiving touchdown through the air. So he had 779 yards and 8 touchdowns in 6 games. Like I said, Georgia would still go on to win the bowl after he would no longer be in the roster. But he would come back as a full-time starter in his junior year in what would be his recovery season. In his 2016 season, which would go down as his age 21 season, he would go on to play 13 games for a Georgia Bulldogs team that would finish with an 8-5 record in Kirby Smart's very first season. This season, they would not finish as a ranked team, but they did go on to beat Liberty in the AutoZone Liberty Bowl, or they beat TCU in the AutoZone Liberty Bowl. But in his junior season, he would finish with 224 carries for 1,130 yards and 8 touchdowns. He had more carries in his junior year than he did his freshman year, but he would have about 400 yards less. He also finished with 86 receiving yards on the year, so he had 1,216 total yards and 9 touchdowns almost averaging 100 total yards from scrimmage per game in his very first year back after that injury that he suffered against Tennessee. And this would transition into Nick Chubb's final season, as he did decide to return for his senior year. In his senior year, he would actually split some carries with Sony Michel. However, in his senior season, he would still go on to play all 15 of the matchups. He played all 15 of the games that Georgia played in a season where they would go on to win in the Rose Bowl as they beat Oklahoma in the college football semifinal, but they would go on to lose in the national championship game to Alabama, just to get a sense of when that was. But they would go on to finish with a 13-2 record. On that season, Nick Chubb would finish with 223 carries for 1,345 yards and 15 touchdowns. His 15 touchdowns are the most rushing touchdowns he put together in a season. He had 30 receiving yards as well. His 1,375 yards from scrimmage are second only to his freshman season, and in his 15 touchdowns are still second in his career to his 16 touchdowns that he put up his freshman year. After his 4 seasons at Georgia, he would be named to the second team All-SEC, second time that he made an All-SEC team, as he made the first team his freshman year. He would declare for the draft and be taken with the 35th overall pick. That's the third pick in the second round of the 2018 draft. Looking at that quarterback for reference, just for context, Baker Mayfield was the first quarterback taken. Saquon Barkley with the second pick was the very first running back taken. Other notable picks in this draft include Josh Allen, the elite quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. He was taken with the 7th pick in this draft. Minka Fitzpatrick from the Dolphins was taken 11. Tremaine Edmonds went from Virginia Tech to the Buffalo Bills with the 16th pick. Derwin James went from Florida State to the Chargers with the 17th pick. Lamar Jackson went from Louisville to the Baltimore Ravens, and then a couple years later went on to be the youngest NFL MVP of all time. And then 3 picks later after him was Nick Chubb. The very next pick after Nick Chubb was Darius Leonard, to get a sense of how talented that 2018 draft class was. But ever since he was drafted by the Cleveland Browns, he has been a member of the Browns ever since. Going into his very first season with them, his age 23 season would be in 2018, and in the 2018 season, he would go on to start 9 of the 16 games, as he had to earn his starting spot in a season where the Cleveland Browns would go on to finish with a 7-8-1 record, winning 7 more games than the previous season, and this was the season where Hugh Jackson got fired. But in his rookie season, he would go on to finish with 192 carries for 996 yards and 8 touchdowns. He is 4 yards away from having over 1,000 rushing yards in every single season that he's been in the league. He also had 20 receptions for 149 yards. He would finish with 212 touches for 1,145 yards and 10 touchdowns at the end of the season. At the end of 2018, he was not necessarily named a Pro Bowl, but earning that starting spot while still doing all that in your rookie year is an incredible feat to hit, especially at this pace. They still went on to miss the playoffs, but he would go on to become the starting running back from his second year on. His second year in the league was his age 24 season in 2019. He went on to start all 16 of the games, and that's so far the only time that he started 16 games in a season. And in 2019, the Cleveland Browns would finish with a 6-10 record. This was the lone season where Freddie Kitchens was the starting coach of the team. Nick Chubb would go on to finish with 298 carries for 1,494 yards and 8 touchdowns on the ground. That amount of rushing yards as well would be the highest totals that he's ever put to date, including this year, even right now. He also has 8 touchdowns. He was able to replicate what he did the previous year. Through the air, he had 36 receptions for 278 yards, but no receiving touchdowns. He would finish with 334 touches, the most touches he'd ever have in a season in his career, and he finished with 1,772 yards from scrimmage. His 8 touchdowns total, even including this season, are the least that he's actually had in a season. But in 2019, he would be named a Pro Bowler for the very first time in his second year, which of course is an incredible feat. This transitions into his third season, the most recent full season that he's played with the Cleveland Browns. In his age 25 season in 2020, Nick Chubb would start all 12 of the matchups he played in a season where the Cleveland Cavaliers would where the Cleveland Browns would finish with an 11-5 record, with the third best record in the AFC North. This is the year where Kevin Stefanski won the Coach of the Year. But in that season, Chubb would finish with 190 carries for 1,067 yards, as he would go on to break the 1,000-yard threshold for the second year in a row. His 12 rushing touchdowns are the most rushing touchdowns he's ever had in a season, and he did that in 12 games. Through the air, he had 16 receptions for 150 yards. He would combine for 206 total touches, the least amount of touches he's had in a season, and he finished with 1,217 yards from scrimmage. His 12 total touchdowns from scrimmage are still the most touchdowns he's had in a season. And in 2020, he would be named a Pro Bowler for the second time in his first 3 years in the league. Once the Browns made the playoffs, and in his only playoff stint, the Browns would beat the Steelers in their first playoff game since 2002, beating the team that they lost to the last time, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They won this one by 11, and then they would end up losing in the divisional round to the Chiefs, who won the AFC but ended up losing in the Super Bowl to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Buccaneers are still the defending champs, at least on this day. And taking a look at what went down, how this transitions into Nick Chubb's current season. In Nick Chubb's age 26 season, even to date, he started 12 games for a Cleveland Browns team that at the moment is sitting on a 7-8 record and very possibly on the outs of the playoff picture. However, Nick Chubb would be named he was named a Pro Bowler just the other day for the third time in his NFL career in his first 4 years. Thus far, he has 207 rushes for 1,143 yards and 8 touchdowns. Of course, it looks as though he may be on pace to have a career yardage and possibly touchdown year. In addition to his 1,143 yards and 8 touchdowns on the ground, he also had 19 receptions for 172 yards and a touchdown through the air. He had 226 total touches on the year, he has them right now. He has 1,315 yards, as the Cleveland Browns still have 2 more games left in their season to go. So it'll be very interesting to see how everything plays out for him. But he was named a Pro Bowler yet again, at the running back position, considering how many running backs I can really name off the top of my head. That's a very impressive feat, and the fact that he's only turning 26 is more than likely hinting at the fact that he's not even close to being done. With that said, I want to first thank the Pro and College Football Reference websites for giving me all the stats and figures that I needed, as well as the ESPN and NFL websites. I want to thank everyone for listening to all 12-13 minutes of this piece. I do hope all is well. If you ever get a chance to watch Nick Chubb, he is currently wearing number 24 for the Cleveland Browns, and hopefully by this time next year he'll have a lot more for me to talk about. But that's the thing about Nick Chubb. I know that year by year, Nick Chubb is going to be someone that's going to be here next year. With that said, last but not least, thanks for listening to this piece. I'll catch you with another piece tomorrow. Peace out.